Sarah? All right. Take a look at page 179 of your book, please. Page 179. We're going to learn that pretty much everything in your body comes in a bag. So we're going to have a membrane around it. Those membranes can have creative names. Periosteum is the membrane on the outside of the bone. Endosteum is the membrane on the inside of the bone. Look at page 179, there you can see. Osteo or osteum, that's our word for bone. Anytime you see osteo or os, we're talking about bone. So the periosteum actually has two layers. There's an outer fibrous layer that's made of dense irregular connective tissue. Outer fibrous layer is dense irregular connective tissue. Nice and strong, you pull it on every direction. That kind of protects underlying structures. That protects the tissues underneath. The inner layer is also called the osteogenic layer. That consists of, or even better way to say it, it houses osteoblasts and osteoclasts. The osteogenic layer houses osteoblasts and osteoclasts. Those are two different kinds of bone cells. They're going to be really important. They're going to be important in the way we learn how they manage calcium levels and reshape bone. We're going to talk about those guys at the end of the page. Let's put a star beside it, we need to know. Sharpie's fibers, you can see the Sharpie's fibers on page 179. Now they're calling them perforating fibers because, well, Sharpie's probably dead anyway, so it doesn't matter we call them those. Those are collagen fibers that anchor periosteum to bone. Those are collagen fibers that anchor the periosteum to the bone. And you'll find lots and lots of Sharpie's fibers in places where tendons or ligaments attach to the periosteum. Places where tendons and ligaments attach to the periosteum have lots and lots of Sharpie's fibers. Good, strong connection. And then the endosteum, the layer on the inside, that's around the spongy bone and around the medullary cavity. That also houses osteoblasts and osteoclasts. That also houses osteoblasts and osteoclasts. So there's your long bones. Gross anatomy are short, irregular, and flat bones. They're all pretty much the same. They have compact bone plates on the outside, they're pretty thin. Compact bone on the outside, periosteum on that. And then spongy bone on the inside. There's no cavity or anything like that in there. Short bones, flat bones, and regular bones, there's no medullary cavity. It's just compact bone around or covering the spongy bone. I want you to take a look at page 178. That's a bone from the skull. You can see compact bone, then a layer of spongy bone, then another layer of compact bone. That actually has a special name. That spongy bone in there has a special name. It's called diploid, and yeah, that's how you pronounce it. Dithyloid. That's that spongy bone filling for the bone sandwich. And you probably should know that term. You might see it again. There is bone marrow in between the trabeculae. Are you guys okay with what a trabecula is? What trabeculae are? See on page 178, the little spikes of bone that looks kind of like spongy? It's the actual sponge part. Trabeculae means little beams. So each of those little spikes of bone, spicules of bone, is a trabecula. Does that make more sense? It's the actual bony part. Looks spongy, little spikes. Those are trabeculae. In between the trabeculae, we'll find red marrow. In between the trabeculae, we'll find red marrow. What's red marrow doing?
Making red blood cells.
Yeah, making blood cells. Red marrow makes blood cells. Location of hematopoietic tissue. That means tissue that makes blood cells. In newborn babies, all of their bones have red bone marrow, and they're all making blood cells. In newborn babies, all of the bones are housing red marrow. As you mature, by the time you're an adult, your flat bones, skull, ribs, sternum, etc., your hip bones, and the proximal epiphyses of your femurs and your humerus bones are the major sites for blood cell production. You don't need all that real estate to make blood cells once you're an adult. Your baby, you do. Microscopic structure, if you're on page 79, turn to page 183. Compact bone structure, if you look on the top there, you see these things look like tree trunks, like cut tree trunks? Those are called osteons. Those are called osteons. You might hear them called conversion systems, but that's going out of style. So just know it as osteon, you don't need to worry about conversion anything really. An osteon is a functional unit of bone. An osteon is a functional unit of bone. That's nice. What's a functional unit? Take a wild guess. You're kind of on the right track.
Generates bone.
Pardon?
It generates the bone.
You're kind of on the right track. You guys are you're kind of there. A functional unit is the smallest structure you can break something down to and have it still do its job. A functional unit is the smallest structure you can break something down to and have it still do its job. So there's a whole bunch of osteons in compact bone. But one osteon is like a little tube of bone, almost like a straw of bone, with blood vessels and stuff inside of it. The osteon is a functional unit of bone. And we can see a bunch of osteons there. In the middle of the osteon is a central canal. In the middle of the osteon is the central canal. That central canal carries arteries, veins, and nerves. That central canal carries arteries, veins, and nerves. Remember we said bones were vascular? Look at that picture on page 183, there are blood vessels all through the bone. Tons of blood vessels in there. Volkmann's canals, you don't have to remember, Volkmann's just a perforating. Perforating canals come in from the side. Perforating canals come in through the side. Central canals run up and down the bone. Perforating canals come in from the side. And then there are lamellae. Lamellae are walls of bone. Lamellae are walls of bone. And you can see those guys on page 183. Remember the generic bone I do for you guys, you cut it open, it looks like this. This is the bony collar, right? This is compact bone, out here the compact bone ring. In the compact bone are all these osteons. It's kind of like tree trunks. And they make up the compact bone. These guys extend down through the bone like that. Is everybody okay with that? Each one of these things, if I was to draw it here, each one of these things is a lamella, a wall of bone. Lamella is singular, lamellae is plural. So each one of these is a wall of bone. This is the same thing as this, right? Each one of those is a wall of bone. Here's the central canal, and have blood vessels in it. Because these guys are shaped in concentric circles, we call those concentric lamellae. You guys know what concentric circles are? Like a target. Circle inside a circle, inside a circle, inside a circle. Those are called concentric circles. Well, these guys are concentric lamellae because circles inside of circles inside of circles. They're called concentric lamellae because of the shape that they're in. Circumferential lamellae go around the outside. Of the bone. Circumferential lamellae go around the outside of the bone. Because they go around the circumference, right? Circumference of the bone is the whole around the outside, circumferential lamellae around the outside. And interstitial lamellae are in between concentric lamellae. They kind of fill in the extra spaces. Since you got a bunch of round tubes together. If I got a bunch of round tubes together like this, if these were all osteons, each one of these was an osteon, and I squeeze on it, what's going to happen to it? Messes up, goes flat, right? Because you got a whole bunch of round things together. The interstitial lamellae is like if I put glue in between here, and then it would be really hard to squish, right? So the interstitial lamellae kind of lock the concentric lamellae into place. Interstitial lamellae lock the concentric lamellae into place. Circumferential lamellae permit twist. The circumferential lamella around the whole bone, that prevents twists. And the concentric lamellae, those are for support. They're long tubes of matrix, and they basically make up most of the bone. They provide most of the support for the bone. The interstitial keep them together, and the circumferential keeps it from twisting. Does that make sense to everybody? You guys all right? Okay. If you look on page 183, bottom left in the center there, and actually kind of on the right too, you can see lacunae. Lacunae is plural, lacuna is singular. A lacuna is a hollow spot in the bone. A lacuna is a hollow spot in the bone. So if I took this thing and blew it up even bigger, that's one of those. This even bigger. You have little hollow areas in here. These are the lacunae. Let's put them out here too. These are the lacunae. Empty spots. And inside of them is where you find the osteocytes. These are the osteocytes living in their lacuna houses. Does that make sense? What are osteocytes? You should know this. Yeah, adult bone cells. Osteocytes are adult bone cells. Their function is to maintain the bony matrix. Their function is to maintain the bony matrix. They make bony tissue. They make bony tissue. But they're trapped inside of there. They're locked inside the bone. They have to get food and oxygen. Canaliculi are the little passageways. Canaliculi are the little passageways. On the model, it looks like bug legs. They're the little passageways that let oxygen and food get to the osteocyte. Osteocyte's locked in, it's stuck. So canaliculi provide passageway. How are you doing, everybody? Okay? Question?
In lab, I think incorrectly said that those hold the bone together too, or concentric.
Concentric are more like, let's see, concentric are more like the sticks in a house. You know, if you're building a house, you got all the sticks in the wall.
No, I'm talking about the caniculi. In lab, because I listened to the lecture this morning, you said that they help hold those concentric together.
No, that was circumferential. If I said that, I misspoke.
Oh, it helps.
Circumferential lamellae hold the bones together.
Okay.
Canaliculi are just a little tiny passageways. Canal, like a canal. Canaliculi is like a little canal. So these guys are just getting nutrients in. The circumferential lamellae hold everything together. If I said that, I misspoke. I apologize. Everybody okay with compact bone? Spongy bone has trabeculae. Trabeculae are little spikes or little beams of bone. Little spikes or little beams of bone. Ever go over an all-metal bridge Like it's got all these metal beams going up, over and around the bridge. That's like what trabeculae are. They provide structure, they provide a firm, solid foundation to put compact bone on the outside of. But each one is a trabecula. Each little spike or each little piece of bone is a trabecula. And they line up along the lines of stress. They line up along the lines of stress. Whichever way you're stressing the bone, the trabeculae are going to be braced against it. They have irregular lamellae. They're not organized like compact bone. It's kind of random walls of bone to make up the trabeculae. They have osteocytes and canaliculi just like compact bone. And there are no osteons. It's not organized like that. It's just kind of random, really. Its directions are dictated by the force that you place on the bone. Everybody good? All right, components of osseous tissue. Organic components, osteoid is ground substance and collagen fibers. Osteoid is ground substance and collagen fibers. Ground substance consists of proteoglycans, and glycoproteins. Don't worry about the difference. It also has collagen fibers. The collagen fibers are going to contribute to strength and flexibility. The collagen fibers in the bone are going to contribute to the strength and flexibility of the bone. There are cells in bone tissue. We talked about them a little already. Osteoblasts, osteocytes, and osteoclasts. You guys probably have a pretty good idea what osteoblasts do. What is it? Yeah, osteoblasts make bony tissue. Osteoblasts make bony tissue. Osteoblasts make bony tissue, and then they turn into osteocytes. They turn into osteocytes. What are osteocytes?
Adult bone cells.
Yeah, adult bone cells, mature bone cells. So these osteocytes started out as osteoblasts. They just made bony tissue all around them. Figured out, oh my gosh, I just hemmed myself in. I guess I'm an osteocyte now. If you guys were osteoblasts, you could stand here and get some cinder blocks and make yourself like a little house. Here, up here, up here, up here, up here, and then close it in. And you'd be inside like a little cinder block hut. You'd be like an osteocyte then. You're an osteoblast when you're building it. You're an osteocyte once you're locked in. And the space you're in is a lacuna. Does that make sense? Was all right?
And do they just repair things around them?
They just kind of secrete more osteoids and once they're locked in.
They just have like a little bit of bone just around them that they kind of.
Yeah, they kind of take care of the stuff in the neighborhood and there's other guys around them and
Kind of jam packed together.
yeah. Osteoclasts are different critters entirely. Osteoblasts become osteocytes. Osteoclasts are their own whole category of cells. They're not related, well, not directly related. Osteoclasts tear bone down. Osteoclasts tear bone down. They actually secrete acids and they kind of crawl along the surface of the bone and they burn the bone underneath it with acid and enzyme. They just kind of dissolve it and leave little destructive paths as they go. They're kind of cool. I'll show you a video of those guys in a minute here. So we got osteoblasts, building bone, osteocytes, maintain bone, osteoclasts, tear bone down. The inorganic part of bone is mineral salts, fancy word hydroxyapatites. Don't worry about that. What I want you to know is it's mostly calcium phosphate. It's mostly calcium phosphate that make the bone hard. Calcium phosphates crystallize on that organic matrix and make it hard. How are you doing, everybody okay? Page 181, that's actually a new picture that I have not seen before in the new edition of the book. They got the bony matrix, they got an osteocyte inside of the lacuna, and they got an osteoclast sitting on top. Osteoclasts are multinucleated cells, they have more than one nucleus. And it's actually sitting on top of the bone matrix, it's trying to eat its way down, and I guess, I don't know if it's gonna make the osteocyte angry or not. That's a nice micrograph there. Alright, now comes your very first chunk of physiology. Up till this point, we've really been just naming things and giving functions. Now we're gonna start looking at a process, a physiological process, how we make bone. Osteogenesis is making bone. Genesis, new to make. And osteogenesis is how we make bone. Now, I have tried different ways to do this. Sometimes I talk about it and show the video, other times I show the video and talk about it. Reception is sort of mixed as to which I should use first. So, I'm going to give you a real brief introduction. And I'll show you a video that's kind of simple, but okay. And then maybe show you another video, and we'll talk about it. We're going to start with intramembraneous ossification. Just in those words, intramembraneous ossification, what can you tell me about the process? Yeah, it happens in a membrane. Intramembraneous ossification is going to happen inside of a membrane, and ossification means make bone. So we're going to make bone starting out in the membrane. Endochondrial ossification. Endochondrial. I already know what ossification means. What do you think endochondrial means?
Inside.
Yeah, inside cartilage. Remember chond, C-H-O-N-D is our cartilage word? Endochondrial ossification actually starts with a hyaline cartilage model of the bone you're trying to make. Endochondrial ossification actually starts with a hyaline cartilage model of the bone you're trying to make. So that's one difference between the two, is where you start. Intermembranous ossification just starts in a membrane. Endochondrial ossification starts with a hyaline cartilage model. By the way, intramembranous ossification forms the cranial bones of your skull and your clavicles. Most everything else is endochondrial ossification. intermembranous ossification of both your skull. Got it. Pretty much everything else is endochondrial. So let's look at your notes. Intermembranous ossification, you start with an ossification center, you secrete osteoid, you form a worm bone and periosteum, and then you form a bone collar. Let's see what that looks like. Here.
Hello, my name is Bruce Closer, and this animation is demonstrating the biological process of intramembranous ossification. During fetal development, intramembranous ossification results in the formation of bones, specifically the flat bones of the skull, the mandible, and the clavicle. To begin, intramembranous ossification takes place in mesenchymal or fibrous connective tissue. In the connective tissue, mesenchymal stem cells come together or aggregate and then begin replicating. After sufficient replication, these mesenchymal cells begin differentiating, becoming bone-creating osteoblasts.
Okay. Try something just for fun. So here we have a membrane. Let's say this membrane is the outside of brand new baby fetus's head. So here we have collagen fibers. So we made the membrane. It's not bony yet, but we made it. That's a regular connective tissue membrane over that. And we get cells migrating into there. We let cells migrate into there. I'm not going to worry that you know they start out as mesenchymal cells and convert. Let's just say osteoblasts start showing up in there. These guys are osteoblasts. Osteoblasts move into the membrane. So if you look in your notes, that's an ossification center. Where those osteoblasts move in, that's step one in your notes. Ossification center forms in a fibrous membrane. Everybody okay? They start to form osteoid. Osteoid is the bone. So these guys all make little bony walls around them. So what I've done there is I've made a trabeculum. What's going to become spongy bone? This thing here is going to be like a trabeculum, spongy bone.
These newly formed osteoblasts then release an uncalcified bone matrix known as osteoid. The osteoid is then calcified with the addition of calcium salts and other minerals. The enzyme alkaline phosphatase acts as a catalyst to this process. As the animation portrays, osteoblasts, when surrounded by calcified bone matrix, can differentiate further into osteocytes, which house themselves in hollowed out living spaces called lacunae. These cells support the bone in maturity. This first process is known generally as ossification, and where ossification takes place is known as an ossification center. As intramembranous ossification continues, osseous branches known as spicules are formed. These spicules will eventually touch one another and fuse together, forming a larger piece. Seeing as mature bone is highly vascular, spicules will grow themselves around blood vessels. This also allows for increased nutrient and waste exchange, during these crucial developmental stages. The initial bone formed from intramembranous ossification is known as spongy bone due.
Okay, spongy bone or woven bone. See in your notes where it says formation of woven bone? That's spongy bone. Call it woven because it looks like it's woven. I'm not real impressed with the art that I'm doing, but that's okay. So we have like a layer of spongy bone. All of these things form this way. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody okay? Alright. We develop a periosteum on the outside of that.
To its sponge-like appearance. Through the process of bone remodeling, the osteocytes at the edge of spongy bone can reorganize themselves into tightly packed bundles known as osteons. These osteons are the foundational building blocks of compact bone, which is then formed on the outside edges of the spongy bone. This layering of compact bone, spongy bone, and compact bone again is the defining characteristics of bones categorized as flat bones. Through a different process of bone remodeling, the middle layer of spongy bone can be removed, creating a medullary cavity. The final structure of completed bones is the outermost layer of connective tissue, known as the periosteum.
Alright, we're gonna just kind of ignore the video from there on. So what we made, we started out with a fibrous membrane. Osteoblasts moved in there and started making bone. They made the trabeculae. And once they had that spongy bone, then more osteoblasts put compact bone on the outside, inside and outside. So you end up with a sandwich of compact bone, spongy bone, compact bone. How do we feel about that? Okay? That is intramembranous ossification. Endochondrial ossification is a little more complex. Endochondrial ossification is a little more complex. These guys are all about the same. This is a new one. It's showing up as first. I don't know who Intellicom is. Feel like taking a chance? Yeah, if anything rude pops up, that's not my fault. It is preview.
Some have described the skeletal system as the infrastructure of the human body, providing a rigid framework that offers protection and support, as well as attachment sites for the tendons and muscles that are essential for locomotion. The skeletal system is comprised of 206 bones, each of which is formed through a process known as ossification. Bone development and remodeling takes place on a continual basis from the prenatal period and early childhood through adulthood, as well as during the healing process that occurs following bone fractures. Ossification can take one of two forms depending on the type of bone that is forming. In the case of flat bones, like those of the ribs, scapula, pelvis, and skull, the ossification process is known as intramembranous ossification. The process is initiated by mesenchymal stem cells, which are cells that have yet to be differentiated into a particular cell type. Eventually, centrally located mesenchymal cells within the embryonic fibrous connective tissue differentiate into bone-forming cells, or osteoblasts. This process constitutes the formation of what are called ossification centers. In the matrix formation phase that follows, the osteoblasts begin to lay down osteoid, which is the organic part of the bone, consisting of collagen fibers. Some of the osteoblasts are entrapped within the osteoid,
really nice picture of canaliculi here. All these little passageways. These are the lacunae with the osteocytes inside of them. It gives you an idea of all the little passageways to get food and oxygen to the osteocytes.
And are then said to be osteocytes. The osteoid then calcifies and forms slender, needle-like structures of spongy bone called spicules, which aggregate in the form of small supporting beams or trabeculae.
Does this help you at all with what trabeculae are? Each of these beams is a trabecula. Everybody doing okay? Questions?
Meanwhile, the blood vessels on the outside of the spongy bone condense and form the periosteum, the fibrous sheath that covers bone.
Did you just say the blood vessels condense and form that?
Periosteum, the fibrous sheath that covers. Meanwhile, the blood vessels on the outside of the spongy bone condense and form the periosteum, the fibrous sheath that covers bone. As the trabeculae thicken,
The blood vessels don't actually make the periosteum. Sorry.
an interconnected network forms, resulting in what's called woven bone, which is characterized by a somewhat haphazard organization of collagen fibers and is mechanically weak. Eventually, this leads to the formation of lamellar bone around the newly formed spongy bone. This lamellar or compact bone has regular parallel alignment of collagen in the form of sheets, or lamellae, and is mechanically quite strong. While flat bones are formed through intramembranous ossification, most bones in the body, such as the long bones of the legs and arms, are formed in a somewhat different manner known as endochondral ossification. This type of bone development involves cartilage models, which are eventually replaced with bony tissue. The process begins in the developing fetus and can be divided into several stages. Around the 8th week of development, chondroblast begins secreting a cartilaginous matrix that will form the hyaline cartilage model for bone development.
Okay, in your notes, under endochondral ossification, you start out with a hyaline cartilage model. Start out with a hyaline cartilage model. That's what this is doing. What do chondroblasts do? Make cartilage. What are chondrocytes? Mature cartilage cells that maintain the matrix.
As with other hyaline cartilage tissues, chondrocytes are trapped in lacunae and a perichondrium surrounds the model. The next stage begins when chondrocytes within the center of the model hypertrophy and begin to resorb some of the surrounding cartilage matrix.
That means they grow really big and then die. Hypertrophy. See, what you're doing is they're hollowing this out. They might call it cavitation in this video. They're hollowing this area out. But he kind of skipped this part. This part here is called the bony collar. Before you start to eat this away, you gotta kind of reinforce it. So the first step from the cartilage model is gonna be formation of the bony collar. That should be in your notes. Yes, number 2, formation of the bone collar. You lay down compact bone along the shaft. And then you start cavitation here. You start to blow up the hyaline cartilage, kind of eat it away. By the way, this is called the primary ossification center. This is where you start turning cartilage into spongy bone.
As these chondrocytes enlarge, the matrix begins to calcify and chondrocytes begin to die as nutrients cannot diffuse through the newly formed calcified matrix. Next, stem cells within the perichondrium divide to form osteoblasts, and a compact bone collar is formed around the calcified cartilage shaft. A periosteal bud consisting of capillaries and osteoblasts, invades the core of the cartilaginous shaft.
Alright, let's see, that's number 4, invasion of the periosteal bud. Periosteal bud is a blood vessel. You need to have a blood vessel in there, you need to have oxygen, you need to have food, you need to remove waste. Because you're gonna feed all these growing cells this growing process. So the periosteal bud breaks in, and you start removing, see we're starting to get hollow here. This is all eaten away. Now we have the bony collar, compact bone on the outside, and a hollow space. This is the beginning of the medullary cavity. And these ends, these regions are gonna move closer to the ends. They're gonna move further and further away. Get more and more hollow area.
Forming a primary ossification center. The remains of the calcified cartilage serve as a template on which osteoblasts can build bone. Bone development extends toward the epiphyses from the primary ossification center. Most primary ossification centers are formed by the 12th week of development. The same basic process of primary ossification is repeated in the epiphyses as secondary ossification centers are formed, replacing the calcified cartilage with mostly spongy bone. As the secondary ossification centers are formed, osteoclasts resorb bone within the diaphysis, creating a hollow medullary cavity. When secondary...
Okay, so here's secondary ossification center. This is how it gets spongy bone at the end. And remember we talked about epiphyseal plates? Epiphyseal plates are places where the bone grows from after you come out of the womb and until you stop growing. That's gonna be this right here. This is gonna turn into an epiphyseal plate. In between the secondary and primary ossification center.
Primary ossification is complete. The cartilage is totally replaced by bone, except in 2 places. A region of cartilage remains over the surface of the epiphyses as the articular cartilage, and another area of cartilage remains between the epiphyses and diaphysis. This is known as the growth region, or epiphyseal plate, and is the point from which all growth in bone length occurs. At adulthood, epiphyseal cartilage plates are completely ossified, and bone growth stops.
That was pretty good. You guys like that? Cool. Any questions about the process? You guys pretty comfortable with that? How many think you got it right now? That many, huh? How many think you can get it if you watch a video and can work on it a little bit? Okay, cool. Good job. If you have problems with it, I'll show you. All I did was put in intramembranous and endochondral ossification, 8 videos in the Google box, and that's the first search return. If you want to find this in particular, it's by Intellicom. I don't know who Intellicom is, but by Intellicom.
So the intramembranous ossification forms cranial bones and clavicle.
Yeah, and some irregulars. Mostly your skull and a couple others.
And then the endochondral ossification forms.
That's all long bones and some of the shorts. Good questions, other questions? Everybody okay? All right, now take a look at your book at page 187. You can say it's a book that I might see. All right. Talk about this. Postnatal growth of bone. Growth in length is called interstitial growth. Growth in width their diameter is called appositional growth. Do you remember when I showed you about cartilage? How appositional growth was like adding rings on the outside? And interstitial growth was kind of like poofing out in the middle? That's the same for bone. Is it okay to erase this?
Yes.
So there's a generic bone. If I do appositional growth, I'm gonna add layers onto the outside. And that'll make the bone bigger. That makes sense, right? Add layers to the outside, like a tree growth. Adds tree rings on the outside, appositional growth. Interstitial growth is growth from the inside. Again, take a look at page 187. There's generic bone again. And I have epiphyseal plates there and there. Those are the areas that are going to grow. That's where it's going to grow from. So for interstitial growth, this is actually going to grow this way, then that way, and that way. And it's going to make the bone longer at the plates. So if I start with a little baby bone here, that's going to end up growing that way and that way. I'm going to make it easier. Let's forget about this. So this is going to grow longer. Longer. Right now you guys are going, what the heck is he drawing? Like that. These ends are going to grow longer and longer and longer. But do our bones look like that?
Nope.
No, it grows that way, but what happens is it gets remodeled. These areas get broken down. As the bone grows, these areas, the shoulders here, aren't under any stress. So they're dissolved, they're resorbed. So you end up with the bone that looks like that. So as it grows out, it kind of gets eaten behind and just makes the epiphyses further and further apart, but about the same size.
Or the osteoclasts doing that.
Exactly, the osteoclasts are tearing the bone down. They get rid of the extra bone. Anytime your bone isn't under stress, it gets dissolved. It's considered extra. Which is why if you have a cast on your leg for a long time, something like that, you take the cast off your leg, it looks smaller, right? It is smaller. The bone's a little smaller, the muscle's a little smaller because they haven't used it. Your body is a use it or lose it proposition. You either work it, use it, or it goes away. Your body's like, I don't need to support all this stuff, so I get rid of it. But that's how bones grow interstitially. They get longer that way from the epiphyses. How do we feel, okay?
Okay, let me ask you something.
Uh-huh.
When it grows what is it? Oppositional growth, is that when, like me, I don't grow too much, me?
Yeah, your interstitial is what makes you taller. Oppositional is what makes the bones thicker.
Would that make the dwarfs,
Your interstitial growth stopped.
right, but, people that have that kind of growth, the oppositional is, what happens to them? Is that happen in
The
humans?
oppositional, if you started lifting weights and getting all bulked
Oh,
up,
okay.
your bones would grow oppositionally,
Okay,
but you wouldn't get any taller. Growth hormone from the pituitary glands is what causes a lot of bone growth. We'll talk about this in ANP2 when we do endocrine system, but now's as good a time as any. I mean, you'll hear it again, you'll get over it. Growth hormone makes bones grow. If you are born and you don't produce much growth hormone, you end up being what's called a pituitary dwarf. You're really tiny, way tinier than you. I mean, like 3 feet, really tiny. Now we can see, oh look, this baby's not growing right, so we'll supplement growth hormone, and baby will be somewhere in the normal range. The opposite end of that is if you make too much growth hormone, you end up a pituitary giant. If it's still developing when you start getting all this growth hormone. If you're an adult and you produce too much growth hormone, you get what's called acromegaly. You get real thick brow ridges. You can't get any taller because your interstitial plates are closed off. You can't get any taller, but you make more and more bone. You get big brow ridges. You get a big, thick nose. Your fingers and toes look like they're huge. They're like sausages. A great example of that is Andre the Giant. How many guys know who I mean when I say Andre the Giant? Either pro wrestling or the Princess Bride, right? One of the two, maybe both. But you know how big he is. He's like 7 foot and change, 7'4", 7'5", I don't know, 500 pounds, something like that. Dude was massive, but he had extra pituitary hormone before his plates closed off, and continued having that extra growth hormone once he was an adult. Once his plates closed, that's what made him big. I have an interesting story. I was in Hershey, PA, and with my first wife, and we were sitting in a restaurant, and he came in with a couple other dudes. I think there was Big John Stud was one of them. There's a third dude. I don't know. They were all pretty dang big. And my wife at the time was like, "Go get their autograph. Go get their autograph." No, just leave them alone. Let them eat. Come on, go do it. I'm not doing it. Okay, I'll go do it. She walked over, and I don't know what exactly they said to her, but it wasn't the most polite thing. And she came back and said, "They were rude to me. What are you gonna do about it?" Absolutely not. It's one of the many reasons why she's the ex. But, pituitary growth hormone is a powerful thing, and it causes bone growth until your interstitial plates close off. By the way, that's one reason why females are often, on average, smaller or shorter than males. Once a woman's body hits sexual maturity, body-wise, then her bone plates close off. Because you don't want to be pregnant, still trying to make your own bone. Because you want all that calcium to go to baby. So once your body says, okay, I'm ready to make babies, bone growth stops. One of the reasons why women tend to be shorter or smaller than men.
It's also why they get taller faster too, right? The boys kind of sped up to get ready for sexual maturity.
That could be. I don't necessarily know that that's peer reviewed, but it wouldn't surprise me. I know they get smarter faster. Let's see. So that's growth in length is interstitial growth. Growth in diameter is oppositional growth. Hormonal control of growth. This is kind of important. As a matter of fact, this is important enough that I'm going to give you your first do-it quiz. I told you there's going to be a quiz on Wednesday to make sure everybody shows up and nobody skips because it's almost spring break. But in order to reward you for showing up, I'm going to do the quiz right here on the board right now. All you have to do is review it. All right, this is what I call a do-it quiz. You guys will walk in the door, all right, do it on the board, and you do this. So if you miss today, you'll be like, what? Wait, what? Do what? But since you guys are here, you'll know what's on the quiz for next class. All right, so what we're monitoring, what we're controlling is blood calcium. calcium level. Blood calcium level is the factor that we're monitoring, the factor that we're controlling. This is hormonal control of growth. We talked about growth hormone. Growth hormone makes your bone grow. Thyroid hormone also makes your bones grow. Everybody got that written down? I'm a bit ahead of myself. I was excited. I was like, yeah, we can do this. Thyroid hormone, growth hormone really makes your bone grow. Thyroid hormone helps your bone grow. Green stop, done. Everybody okay with hormonal control of growth? What I'm going to do here is control the remodeling, hormonal control the remodeling. The hormones control how you remodel your bone as well. I'm jumping ahead a couple, but this will be good. So if your blood calcium level becomes too high, that triggers the thyroid gland, which produces a hormone called calcitonin. Let's say stimulant. The blood calcium level goes too high, that stimulates the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland produces calcitonin. Calcitonin targets osteoblasts, osteoclasts. Calcitonin targets osteoblasts and osteoclasts. It stimulates osteoblasts, because osteoblasts make more bone matrix. It inhibits osteoclasts. So there's less tear down of bone. And therefore, my calcium level drops. Does that make sense? So my blood calcium level is too high. Thyroid gland produces calcitonin. Calcitonin targets osteoblasts and osteoclasts. It stimulates osteoblasts. Osteoblasts build bone. They take calcium out of your blood and put it into bone. Osteoclasts get inhibited, so they do less bone tear down. Are you videotaping me?
No, I'm taking pictures.
Okay. If you know you're not allowed to do that. There's less tear down and more building, blood calcium level drops. How does that sound? Okay? On the opposite, I'm gonna mess with you guys a little bit. Do this over here. If the blood calcium level is too low, that stimulates parathyroid gland. The parathyroid gland produces parathyroid hormone. By the way, you guys can abbreviate parathyroid hormone PTH if you want. You can always abbreviate hormones with me, but you should know what the abbreviations stand for. Like if I asked you, what does TSH do? What would you tell me?
Produces the,
Yeah, if you do TSH stands for thyroid stimulating hormone, what does it do? Stimulates the thyroid gland, right? So if you know what the letters stand for, you're gonna be way further ahead. Don't just learn the letters with the names, but you can use the letters. So parathyroid hormone targets osteoclasts, GI tract, and kidneys. Osteoclasts increase activity, give more space, it's getting really sloppy. So parathyroid hormone targets osteoblasts, targets the kidneys, targets the GI tract. Osteoblasts yeah. Osteoclasts tear down more bone. kidney in the GI tract. Absorb more calcium. And both of those are gonna raise the calcium level. Both of those are gonna raise the calcium level. Yeah, if you guys wanna take pictures of that, go ahead. Because when I say do it, I want you to do exactly that.